Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Dr. Patricia Campos Medina. I serve as the Executive Director of the Worker Institute at the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University. Welcome this morning to our Equity in Focus Report Lounge. This program is being live streamed, so also welcome to our folks who are watching on Facebook, on YouTube, on all the streaming devices. Committed to Cornell University's commitment of excellence in research, the Worker Institute's vision is to lead research and practice, training education programs grounded on workers' voices to build collective power for workers in the United States. Centered on our mission, our work at the Worker Institute seeks to address one critical theme: inequality in work. We believe that inequality is a major social and economic challenge of our time, impacted our democratic institutions. Our principle of practice is to serve as conveners of academics, labor leaders, practitioners, students, and researchers to lead innovation in the American workplace. The report that we are releasing today, Equity in Focus, Job Creation for a Just Society, is the product of a one-year partnership with the U.S. Department of Labor Women's Bureau. We want to thank our partners at the Women's Bureau for their vision in beginning this conversation at the critical moment in time. We are living through unprecedented times of social and worker engagement and worker organizing. Workers are demanding economic investments that invest in their lives and in their communities. Our challenge today is to move the needle forward in demanding investments from our policymakers that invest in opportunity for all workers, including women and workers of color. As we experiment with job creation at the local level, we in apprenticeships and in all kinds of worker investment, we must demand equitable outcomes for those investments. The Equity in Focus report provides a roadmap to help you understand what it takes to develop programs, training programs, apprenticeship programs that focus on the dignity of work and on women's opportunity. I said it before, equity is about making investments that value women's contribution in our economy. Leaders here today know what it takes to value women's work. It takes love in the dignity of their labor, and it requires investment in good wages for the work they do. All work has value, and all work should be dignified. If we invest in women, we invest in our communities, we invest in our society, and we invest in our future. In order to help us get this conversation started and to open up the discussion on our report, I'm going to invite our Dean Ariel Abgar. He's a professor at the ILR School here at Cornell University, and our Senior Associate Dean for Outreach and Sponsor Research. He has a long and prestigious body of work that focuses on two primary areas within employment relationships. He explores the role that conflict has in advancing good collective bargaining practices in the healthcare industry and a variety of other areas of the labor employment relationship. And he's a dean here at the extension programs and one of our big supporters of this webinar series on Equity in Focus. So Dean Abgar.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Patricia. Good morning. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you all to this event, both on behalf of myself and on behalf of the ILR School Dean, Alex Colvin, to the Worker Institute's Equity and Focus release of this report. Welcome to those of you here in person. I have to say that after a long period of COVID, it is really nice to see this room full and vibrant and excited. And welcome to all of you joining us remotely on Zoom or in the other ways that Patricia noted as well. So the release of this report and all the work that went into it, as Patricia noted, is a culmination of many months of partnership with the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor, and a reflection of our school's commitment to leveraging our research, our policy, and our training tools to address one of the most persistent and insidious challenges of our day, inequity in the workplace. Before commenting on the report itself, I'm going to make a few comments on the report itself. I want to give a bit of background about the ILR School and its impact arm, our outreach operation. The ILR School was founded 78 years ago through a legislative act as the New York State School of Industrial and Labor Relations. And with our state colleagues here, I'm very proud of our New York State connection, and has since become a premier institution studying work, and not only in New York State, but across the world. Our school was founded during a time of great social and economic turbulence in the wake of World War II, with a host of labor and employment challenges at the center of the public policy agenda. 78 years later, we find ourselves in another pivotal moment when issues that we study at the ILR School are, again, front and center. Equity at work that we'll be discussing today, providing workers with meaningful voice, good jobs, the role that labor unions play, the employment relationship itself, just to name a few. I'd like to briefly remark on some of the features of the report that stand out to me, and we're going to have a robust discussion here in a moment, but I just want to kind of comment on a couple of things that I'd like to highlight. First, and as noted at the outset, and I'm sure we'll note this a number of times today, this report is the product of a fruitful collaboration with the Women's Bureau through a series of webinars and a summit at DOL. We could not be more proud of this partnership and believe that it's a model for the important interplay between policymakers and researchers. Second, as will be discussed today during the session, this report stands out for both highlighting the many systemic and structural shortcomings and inadequacies that plague workplaces across different industries, but also, not less importantly, emphasizes the unique opportunities that we now have to address the many barriers that women and workers of colors face in attaining equitable access to good jobs and securing working conditions that promote respect and well-being. The long-standing cracks in our employment models that became even more visible during COVID, the political will in parts of DC to invest in high quality, good jobs, and the growing body of evidence regarding the significant price that we pay in perpetuating bad jobs have all coalesced to a clear moment in which the future does not have to replicate the failings of the past. The report offers, as Patricia noted, concrete policy recommendations on how to do exactly that. Third, and related to this point, the report and the series of webinars that it builds on is informed by meaningful exchange with the various stakeholders necessary to push for change: policymakers, academics, unions, workers, community organizations, and more. Comprehensive solutions to enhancing equity at work will require multi-pronged efforts by a range of stakeholders working in concert. Finally, finally is always good. I could go on, but finally, I'm struck, as I'm sure all of you will be, by the scope of this report, which covers 3 industries across different geographical regions. Addressing inequity at work will require tailored solutions for different industries with attention to variation across locations. Each of the industries selected in this report, the care economy, the clean energy sector, and the construction trades, are all central to the pursuit of a just and strong economy. Taken together, as Patricia noted, this report is a blueprint for action, and I look forward to learning from today's presenters about how to leverage this roadmap. I sort of bluffed when I said finally, because now I'm going to just do a couple of thank yous really quickly. I want to say a few thank yous. First and foremost, I want to thank the authors of this report. Dr. Anne-Marie Brady, Professor Risa Leibowitz, and Zach Cunningham, who are sitting up on the stage. All right, we're going to be clapping a bunch, so I'm happy with the clapping. Let's keep it going. I want to thank and appreciate and just I'm in awe of Dr. Patricia Campos Medina for her leadership and vision, guiding the Worker Institute and leading this specific partnership with DOL. I was given 5 minutes. I'm going to remove the clapping from my 5 minutes, but we should still keep clapping. Many thanks to the panelists today, those who are joining us to provide their insights and perspective. And I want to kind of add a special thank to one of our panelists today, New York State Department of Labor Commissioner Roberta Reardon, for her leadership on behalf of workers in our state and for her longstanding partnership with the ILR School. Reports like the one we're going to discuss today would not be possible without the support we receive from the state. We're tremendously grateful for it. Many thanks to all the Worker Institute colleagues. I see many of you standing in the back for all that you did to help with this report, but everything you do each and every day. I love the setup of this room. I think it looks perfect, and I want to acknowledge our conference center and IT colleagues in the New York City office for all the work that went into putting this event together. Rachel, Edward, Allison, Isabel, and Seth, who just joined us just in time to help us get this program going. And thanks to our remarkable marketing communication team, Teresa, Laura, and Dave. We just get tremendous support from these units. I think we have some students maybe in the room who helped with the report. If you can raise your hands, I'd love to thank our Worker Institute fellows who contributed greatly to this report, Sarah, Della, and Samantha. And finally, I'd like to conclude where I started. A huge thanks to the Women's Bureau and our partners, Wendy Chanhoon, Gail Golden, and Elise Shaw, for your partnership, for your collaboration. Thank you very much. And with that, a bit over 5 minutes, I turn it over to Anne-Marie.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ariel, and thank you everyone for coming this morning. The three of us are going to take 5 minutes each to cover cover an aspect or two about the report. So I'm going to kick us off. I just want to remind us all that prioritizing gender and racial equity to promote a strong and just economy is a high priority of the Biden-Harris administration. Historic levels of financing have been made available to support a range of infrastructure projects across the United States through key pieces of legislation, but chief among them, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The immediate issue, of course, is ensuring that the $1.2 trillion in direct government spending made available through the law is distributed equitably, that the jobs created or bolstered through this major infusion of federal funding include groups of people who have been historically excluded from past opportunities, and importantly, that these jobs are quality jobs, jobs that pay well, have strong social and labor protections, and where possible are union jobs. Joining me today to discuss how we best do this are the co-authors of the report, Professor Riza Liebowitz, Professor of Labor and Employment Law at the ILR School and the Academic Director of the ILR Worker Institute, and Zach Cunningham, Training and Education Associate with the ILR Climate Jobs Institute. As we've just heard, the partnership between the Worker Institute and the US DOL Women's Bureau we had the pleasure of hosting a series of webinars and an in-person summit in 2022. The objective was to bring awareness to historic inequities for women and people of color in the labor market and to highlight how to redress these, especially by leveraging the historic levels of investment being made in our economy through the aforementioned federal legislation. Drawing on the information shared through the webinar series and the in-person summit, this report that Riza, Zach, and I authored explores the how. How do we best insert equity into job creation? But to understand the how, we really have to first step back and understand why it's so important that we do this in the first place. Drawing from the lessons learned and themes discussed through the webinar series, this report explores these very issues through the lens of three sectors: the childcare economy, the construction trades, and the clean energy economy. But I'd like to take a moment with my 5 minutes and explore why it's important that we have this series, that this report has been published and reports like it, and why we're here today to discuss this important issue. The why starts with the relationship between our historical and contemporary context. To reverse any long-standing trends in economic inequality between groups, we must first recognize the historical precedent for the inequitable distribution of work and wages that are the root cause of inequitable outcomes in income, wealth, opportunity, and mobility. The foundation of our policy practice in the United States rests at the intersection of our construction of the gender division of labor on the one hand, and the United States legacy of enslavement and the genocide of Indigenous Americans on the other. The social construction of race and gender has fed the persistence of sex segregation, discrimination, and disadvantage for women and people of color in the labor market generally, but especially as it pertains to paid and unpaid childcare work and to women working in the construction industry. This report, as others have done, delves deep into how this construction has informed past policies, rules, regulations, and our normative practices. It is, as our panelist today, Andrea Flynn, has argued, incumbent upon us to rewrite these very rules, regulations, practices, and policies that have held us hostage for too long and resulted in the gross inequities in the labor market for women and people of color. So what does this mean in practice, though? It means that it's not by accident that women of color disproportionately make up a large share of childcare workers who are subsequently very low paid, lack critical social and labor protections. It is not by accident that women are funneled away from construction jobs, whether clean energy or otherwise, and into low-wage care work. It is not by accident that we lack the appropriate national paid family leave policies and childcare programs that put women, but especially women, working low-wage jobs with no benefits at a disadvantage in the labor market. So what is being done to break with historical precedent? Well, let's take the childcare economy as a starting point. In this report, we outline how the pandemic, for all its awfulness, opened the door to addressing the structural deficiencies in the childcare economy through pandemic relief funding. For the first time, states and municipalities were able to benefit from substantial federal investment in childcare through three sources of revenue. The examples described in the report provide a framework for action, demonstrating how localities and states leveraged federal relief to shore up the industry on the one hand, but improve the wages and working conditions of childcare workers on the other, while also demonstrating how these very cities and states are thinking to the future. How do we leverage this relief funding once the funding expires, as it will very soon? What has been demonstrated is that, as in the case of the District of Columbia, taxes can be raised on high earners and redistributed to support childcare workers' pay. Rules and regulations can be structured, as in the case of Washington State, to ensure workers have access to health care. Guidelines can be amended to enable funding to flow to specific sources, such as childcare staff support through education, housing, and pay bonuses, as in the example of Franklin County in Ohio and the state of Maine. These are indeed important steps, but I would argue that ultimately we must understand that the ability to care and the ability to be cared for is a human right. And if it's a human right, if we understand and argue and position it as a human right, then we must also think about this as a national response that is needed. I'll turn it over to Riza to take it from there.
Excuse me. Thank you so much. My focus will be on the section of the report that places equity at the center of careers in the construction industry. And in presenting this, and I'm sure when Zach presents as well, I think you'll see the connections among these three separate sections, which of course all interrelate. And I just start out by reminding us that this is a moment where political, social, and economic conditions are aligned to accomplish the goals of bringing equity, as I said in my focus here, to the construction industry. There is the current historic level of federal funding for infrastructure, and that's combined with conditions on the ground, which includes a labor shortage in the construction industry. And we're not starting from scratch looking at equity. The Equity in Focus report highlights existing models of programs that have made significant progress in recruiting more women and people of color into apprenticeships and careers in the building, in the building trades. In highlighting these models, the report discusses principles that have been put into practice. We describe key elements of these successful programs and make recommendations for creating and expanding programs that implement these key elements. Now, one example highlighted in the report is the Portland Metro Construction Career Pathways Regional Framework to develop regional initiatives to increase diversity in publicly funded construction projects. Another example in the report is the University of Massachusetts Building Authority Program to meet diversity targets and goals on publicly financed construction projects. And in the report, we emphasize that these programs exemplify a model that integrates three essential elements: broad alliances, a holistic approach, and targeted measures for progress toward building trades careers for women and people of color. I'm going to take each of those in turn. First, alliances in the Oregon and Massachusetts examples. In those examples, government agencies provide leadership and resources to build an alliance of stakeholders, contractors, unions, and other organizations committed to making significant progress in representation of women and people of color in the construction trades. Next are the next 2 points I'm going to combine. The measures for accomplishing these goals are both holistic and targeted. These include pre-apprenticeship programs that have direct entry into union apprenticeships where participants learn while they earn, as the saying goes. The measures also include the use of production labor agreements, PLAs, and community workforce agreements, CWAs, entered into by the government agencies, construction contractors, and unions. PLAs and CWAs can be effective tools to increase diversity by including provisions such as targeted hiring and work hour goals, supportive employment conditions and practices that include changing workplace culture, and providing family care funding and services that enable everybody to actually have access to these jobs. As important is the use of early and ongoing meetings of the alliances, the groups in the alliance, to monitor compliance with the PLAs or CWAs and to address problems as they occur, rather than looking back and seeing what the problems were. The use of these strategies and tactics have resulted in impressive gains. In Oregon, in 2019, women were 7.5% of construction apprentices. In 2021, the Policy Group on Tradeswomen's Issues, which is in the Massachusetts area, reported that women in registered union apprenticeship programs in Massachusetts increased to 10.4%. Now, there's still a lot of work to be done, but when you compare those percentages to the rate of under 4% of women in federally registered apprenticeships and in construction trades jobs, this shows that significant progress can be made. And the University of Massachusetts Building Authority has achieved the highest levels of employed tradeswomen in its history, exceeding workforce compliance goals on university construction projects. One important point that we stress in the report, and I want to stress here, is the central role of unions in these success stories in Oregon, Massachusetts, and across the United States. In another example, the report highlights the work of the New York City Building and Construction Trades Council to increase diversity in union pre-apprenticeship programs with direct entry into union apprenticeships. By 2012, in New York City, 2/3 of the registered apprenticeships were people of color and almost 11% were women. It should be also noted that the vast majority of apprenticeship programs are in the unionized sector. Further, the success rate of union-led programs increasing diversity is far greater than the non-union apprenticeship programs. Now, the report notes as well recent federal programs from the Biden administration to increase the diversity in federally funded construction projects. And these include some of the same measures I've just noted, requiring PLAs in certain circumstances and more proactive engagement by government agencies. The Equity and Focus report also makes recommendations to build on the elements of these successful models. Again, to increase and build on government leadership in creating broad alliances with unions as essential partners in those alliances, a holistic approach to provide necessary education, training, and support, such as childcare, and targeted goals, tracking, and compliance measures to achieve real progress toward equity in the construction industry. Thanks very much.
Hello, everyone. Zach Cunningham. Nice to be with you all today, and thanks to Anne Marie and Risa. Just to set the context for talking about my portion of the report, the clean energy economy, in order to build it out at the scale needed to avoid climate catastrophe in the time frame needed, is a monumental undertaking. So it's going to require that we fundamentally transform how we generate and transmit energy, how we move people and goods from place to place, how we operate our buildings, just to name a few of the big ticket items. And with that is going to come a rapid growth in jobs in construction, energy efficiency, manufacturing, and other areas. And in fact, we're already seeing job growth in some of these areas as the US Department of Energy has estimated that about 40% of all job growth in the energy sector in 2021 came in what they call net zero emissions aligned areas. But that's really just scratching the surface, because in coming years, there's any number of projections that you can read about the massive job growth, numbers in the millions, that are going to come in clean energy. So I say all that to note that now is a chance really to build a new sector, a large sector from the ground up, and offers an opportunity to make sure as we're building it, we don't replicate a lot of the inequities that are baked into the system that Risa and Anne Marie have highlighted. So with that in mind, the clean energy section of the report, much like other areas, look at issues of job quality and then equitable access to those jobs. So for that first point, job quality, just a few notes. In the clean energy economy as it currently exists, union density in a lot of ways mirrors what we see in the country as a whole. So union density overall is about 10%, 6% in the private sector. And in clean energy, just to draw one example out, about 10% of solar workers are currently unionized. But that number even is a bit misleading, because amazingly to me, half of all unionized solar workers in America are located in one state, and that's California. So there's a mass amount of workers who are not unionized. And unsurprisingly, initial reports about this industry show poor job quality, low pay, all sorts of issues on the job, reliance on contingent workers. So that's something that we really need to focus on, while also recognizing that in areas like fossil fuels that tend to be more heavily unionized, we're going to have a situation where we want to avoid what a lot of labor leaders and union workers worry about, which is transitioning away from sectors that are heavily unionized, only to have them be replaced by low quality jobs in clean energy. In terms of that second point, how do we make sure that women, people of color, folks from other marginalized communities have access to these hopefully good jobs that we can be creating? Here, the clean energy economy as it currently exists is overwhelmingly male, which is not surprising, because some male-dominated industries like construction and manufacturing are a lot of those jobs. And there's a fair amount of racial diversity in the industry, but still Black and brown workers are underrepresented in a lot of key areas like solar generation that I'd mentioned previously. So in the report, looking at these areas, two things really stuck out. First is that organized labor needs to be a central player and a central partner in the transition and in building out clean energy jobs. And the second is that a lot of the tools that we need to make sure these jobs are high quality and that there's equitable access already exist in a lot of ways. So the key isn't necessarily creating new tools. The key is making sure that we tweak some of these existing tools and then scale them out as needed to make sure that we're having an impact nationwide. And here, that's where federal and state government really plays a big role. So clean energy jobs are heavily subsidized by the government, which provides opportunities to attach strings to those funds and push for certain job quality and equity goals. That's especially true with the passage of Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act in recent years that pour hundreds of billions of dollars into clean energy projects. There are key tools that Risa mentioned, like prevailing wage, apprenticeship utilization requirements, pre-apprenticeship, targeted hiring programs. On the non-construction side, making sure that we have tools like labor peace and labor neutrality in place, so manufacturing and supply chain workers have a free and fair chance at electing a union in their workplace. And just one tool I'm going to highlight in a bit more detail is the Project Labor Agreement, or PLA. So for those who don't know, PLAs are pre-hire collective bargaining agreements that set the terms for a specific project: pay rate, safety requirements, staffing, schedules, all sorts of areas. Contractors, project owners, and unions are typically parties to these agreements. And in some areas where it's legal to do so, the government can really lead by incentivizing or even mandating PLAs where public money is involved. Last year, the Biden administration required project labor agreements for federal construction projects over $35 million. And here in New York, I'm proud to say policymakers have turned the state into a nationwide leader on offshore wind development, while also making sure that any renewable energy projects above a certain size require project labor agreements and other strong labor standards. Now, while PLAs have been around for a long time, this is where I mentioned tweaking these tools for our current moment. In recent years, they've really been expanded, and a lot of folks are looking at PLAs as a tool to grow career opportunities, specifically by including hiring preferences based on geography, income levels, and other criteria. So with one specific example that was highlighted in the clean energy webinar that happened a few months ago, offshore wind giant Ørsted signed a groundbreaking project labor agreement with North America's building trades union that covered its projects up and down the East Coast from Maine to Florida. That's going to create high quality union jobs for current building trades members. But the parties also have built in key equity standards. So the agreement sets diversity targets and performance monitoring. It invests in pre-apprenticeship programs and other measures to make sure that we're recruiting and retaining employees from underrepresented communities. So I highlight that as one example where we don't know how effective it's going to be yet. It's new, but it will be interesting to watch that in the upcoming years, and it'll serve as an intriguing model for how we can rapidly expand a clean energy source, build out family and community sustaining jobs, and also expand opportunities for underserved communities to find careers in the trades. With that, strong labor community partnerships are going to be critical to making sure that's a success. And also there's going to be a need for rigorous monitoring and enforcement to make sure that the paper goals turn into progress on the ground in reality. And that's something I hope a lot of folks in this room can help with.
Thank you very much, Zach and Riza. We will now welcome Patricia Campos Medina, Commissioner Reardon, and Gail Golden from the Women's Bureau to provide further reflections.
Okay.
Refereeing us.
Yes. Before I get started with this portion of the discussion, I wanted to acknowledge a couple of folks who are here and that have been partners as well in this process of discussing equity in job creation. And that is our dear friend of the Worker Institute and of this whole webinar series, Michelle Perez, Assistant Deputy Secretary for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So, Michelle, thank you for making the time here. And I do also, there's some representatives from Governor Hochul's office. In addition to you, we also have Clarissa Rodriguez, Chairwoman of the Workers' Compensation Board for Governor Hochul. And I know that there's folks here from the Office of Diversity, the Chief Diversity Officer for Governor Hochul as well. So thank you so much for joining us. So we have heard through the report and the release, and I hope that you get a chance to read it. It's good reading, by the way. So take the time to go through it. There is parallel alignment between the federal government right now in the Biden-Harris administration to invest in job creation that actually changes the dynamics of who gets benefit and who is actually benefiting from that investment. And in New York State, given to the leadership of Governor Hochul and our dear friend Roberta Reardon, Secretary of Commissioner of Labor, there is a great alignment between the federal government and New York State as to how to go about achieving equity and better outcomes, economic outcomes in racial and economic equity for women of color and for women and workers of color. So given that alignment, we thought it was important that we highlight what's happening in New York State and also talk with the Women's Bureau, who is spearheading this effort of making sure that the infrastructure investment coming out of the federal government has a measurements for racial and equal outcomes. How can the federal government work with state governments and local governments to make sure that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past? So this discussion is about doing that. We understand that the rest of the country is not like New York State. You know, we have 20% union density in New York State. We are very fortunate to have that. We have great collaboration between elected officials and labor movement and community groups. And so what we can experiment here can serve as an example of how to go about. Later on, you will hear from our partners in other parts of the country about how they're approaching that issue. But we wanted to highlight New York. And even though when there is great alignment, what still needs to happen? So the first question that I'm gonna ask, and Gail Golding is our Deputy Director for the Women's Bureau. She is representing Wendy Shohum, who couldn't be here today, but Gail has been part of this process for a long time, from the beginning, from the webinar equity series. So Gail Golden serves as a Deputy Director for the Women's Bureau. She is a policy analyst, strategist, and former Rhode Island State Senator. Prior to joining the Women's Bureau, Gail served as a campaign advisor for Family Values at Work, where she helped advocate for a national paid family and medical leave program. Gail has also served as a strategic initiatives officer at the Women's Fund of Rhode Island. So she has, in addition to representing the Women's Bureau, has great field experience driving policy on equity outcomes. And of course, Commissioner of Labor Roberta Reardon. She was appointed to serve as the department's commissioner in October 2015, and then confirmed by the New York State Senate on June 15, 2016. Prior to being the Commissioner of Labor, she was the president of the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, AFTRA, from 2007 and 2012. She was the founding co-president of SAG-AFTRA, a 165,000 member union for the entertainment industry. She is a graduate of our Union Leadership Institute and a great friend of the ILR school. So to get this quick conversation started, I'm gonna ask Gail, what was the initial goal for initiating this discussion, and what continues to be the commitment of the U.S. Labor Department and the Women's Bureau in advancing equity outcomes and tied to the job investments from the federal government?
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you so much for having me here today. And it's wonderful to see all of you here and who are watching online. Such a pleasure to join you. Really thrilled to see this report come out. So congratulations to you and to Risa and Zach and Anne Marie for writing a comprehensive report about this, and to the students who helped support it. Everybody knows that's an key and important role in getting this research out. So thank you so much. I also just want to acknowledge I'm up here for the Women's Bureau, but I'm also joined today by Leah Rambo, our Deputy Director, who recently joined the Women's Bureau after a 35-year career working in sheet metal trades, training other women, and really leading union leadership here in New York to train and get more women involved, and had, I think, tripled the amount of women in her union. So phenomenal experience. I encourage afterwards who want to talk about how do we make these practices real on the ground. Leah is an incredible research. I think you're also an ILO graduate, right? So many of you, I'm sure, in the room know her. And also Amy Dalrymple on our staff at Women's Bureau, who's one of the other people who make our work possible, is in the room today. So I want to acknowledge her work as well. And congratulations again about this exciting report launch. So let me tell you a little bit about what the Women's Bureau is. A lot of people don't know, have never even heard of the Women's Bureau. So I'll give you a little bit of background about that. And then how does the Women's Bureau see our work as central to changing the way we're doing equity and investing in federal dollars going forward, and some concrete examples of how that's happening. So the Women's Bureau is over 102 years old. So think back in that time when women won the right to vote. That's around the starting point of the Women's Bureau, and we are laser focused on helping working women in this country. We are the only federal agency mandated by Congress to do so. And so we do that a few different ways. We have what Wendy often refers to as our superpowers. And we have those superpowers of doing policy research and analysis. We do outreach, education, and stakeholder engagement by bringing people together and doing convenings to have these rich discussions about what's affecting working women's lives, outcomes for them. And then we also have a small grant making program. So I'm going to touch a little bit on all of that today. And we do all of that thinking about what policies really affect working women. And so one of the ways that we've framed it is thinking about the ways that the workforce is really gender segregated. So if you think about that there are men's jobs and women's jobs, why does that happen? Why are those jobs that are predominantly male dominated tend to be higher wages? When you look at women's work, it's often undervalued and underpaid. And how can we really change the narrative on that? So our work, our research, our convening, our grant making is all designed to change that balance and to find ways that we can improve wages and job quality for women in the workforce, and at the same time remove barriers to entry into jobs that have been predominantly male dominated for women. And that's great news because that's embedded into the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to equity. Risa and Anne Marie and Zach really touched on that about what this past couple of years of funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law and CHIPS and IRA have really pulled together that commitment for equity and making sure that those are good jobs. We're not just creating jobs, we're creating good jobs. And that's what the federal government is all working together to do. And, I think Risa also touched on it that right now women only make up 4% of the construction trades. So if we didn't put our laser focus on how do we change the makeup of who those jobs would be, we would continue to have reinforcement inequity that currently exists. And so at the Women's Bureau, we're trying to figure out ways to flip the script. And that's part of the reason that we really work together with ILR over this Equity in Focus series, this webinar and the summit, to highlight best practices, ways that people have been trying things out, not just this year, but for years in the past, to be able to flip the script and show how it's possible because we've seen it work in different places. So we have done that through our Equity in Focus series, and we've also done it by our grant making. At the Women's Bureau, we have something called WANTA, Women in Non-Traditional Occupations Funding. It's a grants program. It was just announced, this year's just announced on Friday of last week, right here in New York. That it's opened right now for grant applications, but that investment has been to try and get women into those non-traditional occupations. That has been a way to get into, start pre-apprenticeships for women to be able to get into construction, but also other careers in manufacturing, in IT, other careers that have been historically more difficult for women to get into. We also have been working for the past year really concentrated effort with tradeswomen across this country to make sure that there are equity plans in place so that when this funding from the federal government becomes available, as it now is, that tradeswomen are at the table and being able to work with contractors, with their state, with other stakeholders in their communities to be able to say, hey, we need to figure out ways that this money is going to be invested and it'll be equitable and we'll be at the table and women will be on those job sites. And then we also have another grant program called FAIR. The next grant announcement will be coming out very soon. That's about fostering rights. It's our Women's Bureau investment in making sure that women actually know what their rights are on the job and have a place where they can go to get that information and take action when they feel like there has been an issue that they need to have addressed. And then Women's Bureau is just part of the Department of, I shouldn't say just, we are part of the Department of Labor. We are a mighty part of the Department of Labor, since we are working on behalf of half the workforce. But we also work with agencies across the Department of Labor through something called the Good Jobs Initiative, which is centered at the Department of Labor. And what that was designed to do is to work across the federal government with all the departments that received funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law, through CHIPS and IRA, to make sure that everything that we're doing stays centered on those good quality jobs. Some of you may have seen that Commerce recently released their CHIPS funding opportunity, and in that, really excited to announce a very strong support for having childcare available to workers, meaning that there needed to be a childcare plan in place for anyone that receives, any company that is going to receive $150 million or more from that grant opportunity. So I think that's a real opportunity to change the way that the federal government is viewing childcare as central to all types of infrastructure and job creation. And finally, I'm just going to tie that up to very exciting news that happened yesterday. I don't know if you all saw it, but the president signed an executive order on care yesterday. It was a really historic event. And in that, it's building off the experiences of that CHIPS funding opportunity and the work that WANTO has done historically, because WANTO has always supported a significant amount of the funding through those grants to make sure that the women who are participating in them have the kind of supports like childcare that they need in order to do their jobs. The executive order signed yesterday by the president directs the entire federal government look at the way that we are supporting jobs and workforce development and making sure that those opportunities include additional supports for childcare and long-term care, so that workers know that they can go to a job and have some support to be able to meet those needs. So we're really excited about that. It does many other things too, but very excited about that.
So given the unprecedented investment on equity outcomes and demanding equitable outcomes in job creation from the federal government, and the commitment of the Women's Bureau to demand that from all the agencies in the federal government, so when the monies are released to the state, that they also drive those commitments towards the state. How is New York State working to fulfill that commitment, and what are the challenges that you are facing to be able to advance the needle forward in New York State? Although we are in a good place, but there's so much more work to be done.
So much more work to be done, yes. Well, first of all, thank you for the question. And thank you to the USDOL Women's Bureau and to the ILR for this fabulous report. It's really, you must read it, it's really great. But also thank you for including me today, because it's a real opportunity to talk about what the state is able to do in this whole section. You know, the report is extremely thorough. It is illuminating, and it truly provides a roadmap for how we can overcome the challenges to achieve really substantive equality for our workforce. And that is, you know, we're talking about really changing the metrics, not sort of pecking away at them, but really making a big difference. And I think the report dives into how to do that specifically. It is absolutely no surprise that one of the key issues addressed in the report is childcare. So we, New York State DOL recently released a report on the impact of the pandemic on women in the workforce and the gender wage gap. We did a report on the gender wage gap in 2018, and the governor asked us to go back and look at it through the lens of the pandemic. No surprise, the most consistent and urgent theme that we heard was the availability of affordable childcare. And, you know, we all know this has been an issue for a very long time, but evidently the world didn't know that. So the pandemic has really exposed how deep this problem is and how deep its impact is on our economy. I tell people all the time, childcare is not just a woman's issue, and it's not just a parent's issue. It is a societal issue, and this pandemic has made it absolutely clear that we should be treating childcare as a critical piece of infrastructure as we develop our future economic development plans, because without that, we are leaving significant parts of our population out of the workforce, either completely out of the workforce or underperforming because they're unable to hold a full-time job. And that is just economically unacceptable. I mean, I know the ethical and moral reasons for doing this, but let's talk in terms that other people listen to more strongly, perhaps. You are leaving money on the table when women and people of color are unable to participate fully in our workforce. Unfortunately, we have never treated childcare as infrastructure. It is totally, as you say in the report, it's a market-driven plan, and therefore it's never going to succeed. Childcare workforce in New York State is 96% women, highly populated by women of color. These workers who play a critical role in nurturing and, in fact, educating our young children have a median wage of $32,000 a year, and that is $20,000 less than the median wage of other workers. So they cannot get ahead at this wage, and therefore they do not stay in this workforce. They move on because they have no choice. There's a tremendous amount of churn in this workforce. We're also not where we need to be in terms of childcare affordability. According to the Economic Policy Institute, New York State ranks 6th highest in the country in terms of infant care, and a typical family would have to spend 22% of their income for one infant in care. And that's just, who can do that? We've all heard the stories of usually the female partner in a relationship who stays home because she's making less money in the job and she can't afford to do that and pay for childcare. Thankfully, childcare continues to be among the highest priorities for Governor Kathy Hochul. She knows in her bones what it's like to be a working mother and what it's like to have to make those choices about affordable childcare and leaving a job that she loved years ago because she could not get the childcare that she needed. So her fiscal year 2023 budget committed more than $7.5 billion over the next 4 years for childcare. That includes supporting the incomes for childcare workers, making childcare more affordable, raising the percentage so more families can afford it. A lot of different fixes, but really critical. She is eloquent when she talks about this because she's experienced it. And she now has grown children with a baby. They're about to experience it too. She also reestablished the Child Care Availability Task Force to develop an implementation plan for universal childcare. I was on the original Child Care Task Force. We met for, I think, 2.5 years. It was an exhaustive and exhausting project. It was a room full of childcare providers and experts and advocates. And it was eye-opening for me. I don't have children. I grew up in a family of 6, so I raised my brothers, thought I was done with that part of my life. But I, you know, I learned a lot about what it means for families to lose their childcare and not have any other choice but to stay home. So we have reignited the task force, and we're going to be looking at how do we do childcare as critical infrastructure, which is what it really should be. So we're making strides, but as Patricia said, we're not there yet. We have a lot of more work to do. Another theme in the report is very much in line with the work we do at the DOL, and that is creating the green economy. I was a member of the Climate Action Council, so for the last 3 years, I sat in many, many, many meetings, unfortunately, most of them on Zoom because of the pandemic, but we listened to many experts, many advocates, many community members, stakeholders, talking about how do we make this transition happen in a timely way in the state of New York. And as you all know, and as Zach said, it is a very complex issue. There are lots of moving parts. Some of them we know what they are, and some of them we don't know. There are jobs of the future that haven't really been created yet. So when we talk about workforce development, some of it's a little bit in the dark, which is a struggle for us. We recently, as the Climate Action Council, reached a significant milestone with the release of the scoping plan. And I am very confident that this plan will serve as a framework for achieving the state's aggressive climate agenda in a way that protects and supports working people, that strengthens the labor movement, and builds a more equitable economy. This outlines a roadmap that we can use to meet the Climate Act's requirement that 35% of clean energy spending will benefit underserved communities. Now, this is not just jobs. This also means pollution reduction, transportation, and low-income energy assistance. So it's a big, big task, and I think we're up to it. Our Just Energy Transition Office is being established as I speak in the DOL, and we're going to reach these benchmarks by enhancing our outreach efforts to include disadvantaged communities. The Office of Just Energy Transition will focus in two ways, really. It's going to focus at underserved communities who need to have the ability to be in these new jobs, but also to help workers in the fossil energy sector transition their skills to the clean energy world. And that is a highly complex issue. It's going to involve many of our labor unions. They have apprenticeship programs, and that is a very helpful thing for us because they're already training their workers, but it's going to be an ongoing issue, and it's going to take, as I tell some of my friends, it's not happening like that. It's happening like that. And that's an important thing to know. One thing that was reinforced in the scoping process was the importance of bringing labor to the table. I am very, very proud to say that Governor Hochul, one of the first things she did was to appoint Mario Cilento, president of the State Fed of the AFL-CIO, as a member of the council. And he brought a much needed labor voice into the discussions. He came in the last 6 months, so he had 600 plus pages of things to read, which I'm shocked to say he did. But he was really, really instrumental in making sure that we had all of the protections that labor needs in this space so they don't get displaced by low wage, non-union jobs, because that is not what we want to do. I have always said that unions are a great equalizer. I belonged to 3 unions in my working life, and they made my profession affordable and actually fun and safe. I could not have done it without them. People in unions get paid the same, regardless of their gender, regardless of their ethnicity. And that is a critical piece of what unions do. Plus, our unions are undertaking new concerted efforts to diversify their membership. This has always been an issue, and it really is squarely in the front of many leaders' minds right now. My dear friend, Gary LaBarbera, whom many of you know, is the president of the Building and Construction Trades Council. And he made it his mission, as he said, to ensure that New York's union membership reflects the cities that they're building. And it's just such a poetic way to put it, but it's so true. And he really committed himself to this over the last 15 years, and it has been a success. New York's building and construction trades are downstate or minority majority at this point, which is really an amazing development. Not only is it the right thing to do, but as I said before, it's an economic reality that we have to face. There are so many projects, the president's many investments, the state's $4.2 billion statewide infrastructure bond. There is going to be a deep need for well-skilled, trained tradespeople in the immediate future, and we cannot do it simply with the people who are now in our labor unions. They need to expand, and they talk to us about it all the time. That is why registered apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship programs are more important than ever. This is something that has really, when Gary said, I want to diversify the trades, this is how they did it. So New York has one of the largest registered apprenticeship programs in the country. We have over 940 programs across the state. The majority of them are building trades programs, but we are rolling those out to other industries because they're understanding that training your workers is a smart thing to do. And using a registered apprenticeship program is an ideal way to do it. Earn and learn, and it's really great. These programs have been essential in diversifying our construction workforce, and we are making additional efforts to reach students while they're still in school. It's very important. I always say, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, let's get to those students and help them imagine a future before the world takes over and diverts their attention in some other way. Help them spark an interest in pathways. And with the green economy, there are going to be so many new different jobs. And we need to reach in and help them understand that this could be their future. At times, we'll be looking to prepare our workforce for jobs that we don't even know about yet. And that's a significant struggle. We need to understand what are the skill sets that young people need to hang on to so that when those jobs crystallize, they'll be ready to step into them. And that is a very different problem than we've had in workforce development in generations. But it's a great problem to have. Fulfilling the mandate for an equitable and just economy is complex, but it's a moral imperative that we fiercely pursue this mission. It also happens to make good sense economically. When women in disadvantaged communities are not given the opportunity to reach their full potential, we are leaving literally billions of dollars on the table. We have to break down barriers one by one. We must open as many doors as we can and make them easier to walk through and frankly, easier to stay in that room once you get there. Because getting the job and the training is one thing, staying in that workforce is another. And we all need to understand that your job is not finished with the training. We have to make everybody feel welcome in our workplaces. I am confident that through state and federal partnerships that we have, we can do just that and we can affect lasting change for the generations to come.
Thinking about the alignment that you both spoke about between the federal government and the state government, and thinking about the challenges that that we still face to make this vision and this policy alignment real for people, I would like to get you to respond to what are the challenges that you are seeing in your work with states, with New York, but other states. What are the challenges that are real, that are happening, that you are struggling with, and how can stakeholders, unions, community groups, and research institutions like us can help support and continue moving forward the needle on this debate? I say that because the issues that we're talking about, the inequities and the structural inequities and how women land in segregated occupations, those issues we've been working on for a long time. And we have people in the field from philanthropy to unions to community groups that have been innovating on the ground to drive this point forward. And we will hear from panelists that will talk about how they've been doing it. So the issues are not new. What is new is the moment, the policy alignment. But what are those challenges that you're still facing and that you need those stakeholders to stay engaged and give you feedback, and how can they do that? So you first, and then you can respond.
Well, I think I'll take two things from what Commissioner Reardon just highlighted. I think the issue of childcare is something that is not unique to New York. That's the entire nation is really trying to figure out how do we ensure that our care infrastructure is strong and robust, and not only that it's that families have access to the childcare and long-term care that they need, but that it's affordable, accessible, high quality, and also that the workforce, which is predominantly women, are well supported and those are high quality jobs. That's a huge question, and that's happening. States across the country are grappling with the best way in order to do that. I do think that the executive order that the president signed yesterday really brings that to the forefront and figures out ways that we can use these federal dollars for that investment. For those of you who are wondering those own data points about what it might look like in your own state, if you're not in New York, about the childcare prices, Women's Bureau actually released a national database of childcare prices. Is up on our website. And that's the first national database on the county level of what childcare prices are across this country. It really shows how much it means to families to be able to have that childcare support. So I encourage you to check out that resource. You know, the other thing that I think was so important to highlight is that this is not just about training people to get into jobs, but actually creating workforces and environments in which people want to stay in those jobs. Part of the work that we have been doing at the Women's Bureau is particularly focused on gender-based violence and harassment, creating workplaces that feel safe, are safe, that people have the support that they need in order to feel like they can come to work and have a thriving work life, feel safe there, but also feel valued. And so there are very concrete ways that you can do that. There are a lot of different initiatives that cities, states, unions across this country have done in order to work on creating those environments. It's particularly important to recognize that those need to be supported and enhanced, and people know what their rights are as well.
So let me add to that. New York State has had a law that every employer in the state has to provide anti-harassment training in the state. And we just revised our model policy. We just released it, I think, last week. There's a video that you can download from the DOL that meets all of the standards, and you don't have to hire anybody to do it. You can show the video to a room full of workers. They can do it at their computer. There is an assessment that each worker has to do, so make sure that they've actually, listened and participated in the training. We also have a toolkit. It's all free, but every employer in the state, public and private, is required to do this every year. And that goes a long way towards informing people actually about what sexual harassment is. It is shocking that many people don't realize that their behavior is harassing. And I have been in many rooms where people have said, but I was just joking. And it's not, sexual harassment is defined not by the intent of the person, it's defined by how it's received by the person who's receiving it. And that is a huge, that is so important for people to understand. It is, we need to be sensitive to each other. And, you know, occasionally someone will make an off-color joke, they'll say something, that happens. But if it happens repeatedly, there's intent. And there's impact on the person receiving it, and it needs to stop because people need to be comfortable in their workplace or they will leave. And that's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable for those workers, and it shouldn't be acceptable for employers. So we are very focused on that. It is, I think, potentially a real game changer. The best thing that I've seen with the harassment training is it starts people to have a conversation. Because that's really what this is about. The only way you can change people's behavior is by engaging their heads. You can't just punish them. They need to understand why that's a problem. And so the more we can have this conversation in the public sphere, the better.
We could certainly keep going on this conversation, and there's so much more we would like to ask you. I know you're staying until the end of the program, but I wanted to move forward to our stakeholder panel because they have some input to give us on the report and things that we can do to better make this partnership between the federal government and the state and our municipalities work to achieve the outcomes of equity on economic outcomes for women of color and women and all workers. So I'm going to we're gonna close this session of the panel. There's we're gonna stick around. We're gonna have a question and answer question, and that you can also answer from the audience once we get into that session of the panel. But thank you so much for being here and for the support of this effort. And we're gonna bring our stakeholder panel and Anne-Marie Brady to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it's such a pleasure to welcome Andrea Flynn, Senior Fellow at Health Equity at the Maven Collaborative. We have Vonda McDonald, president of the Central Labor Council of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. We have Maya Goodwin, who is the senior manager of workforce policy and research at the Markle Foundation. And we have John Murphy, who is the UA international representative of the New York State Pipe Trades Association. So welcome. The intent of this final panel today is to have a variety of individuals from different sectors or different stakeholder groups take time to reflect on the report and what specific aspect they found interesting. So I think I'm going to start today with Andrea Flynn. And Andrea, I'm going to ask you a question. Would you, Andrea, you and your team at the Maven Collaborative have done a lot of work on occupational segregation. Can you tell us a bit about why you use this as one of your entry points into thinking about our economy and how your approach differs from some of the other work we've seen on occupational segregation?
Sure. Is this working? Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all today. Thank you for having me. So my team and I at the Maven Collaborative really look at occupational segregation as a critical entry point to thinking about the structural inequities in our economy. And as this report points out, we really think of occupational segregation as the embodiment of centuries of racism and sexism that are baked into our labor market and into the rules and policies and programs that shape our economy. I'm going to talk about 4 things that we think about when we approach this important topic. And the first is narratives. We think about many different layers of occupational segregation, but where we really start is thinking about what are the narratives that undergird this problem in our economy, right? What are sort of the undercurrents that have allowed this problem to exist and persist? And one of the narratives that we spend a lot of time focusing on is deservedness. And we really think it's important to acknowledge that so many of our social and economic disparities and inequities are really rooted in this notion of deservedness and the role that anti-Blackness has played in that idea of deservedness throughout our history. We really think about how this idea of deservedness that has really existed from the earliest days of our history shapes so much of what we think, right? Who is deserving of public goods and public funding and public services? Who deserves safe, quality work? Who deserves the autonomy to decide the timing and size of their families? Who deserves dignity and respect in their work? And we all know that historically Black women in particular and women of color more broadly have really been regarded of not deserving. And at Maven, we really see that as a root cause of why we have the economy we have today, why we do not have more robust public funding and public systems. So that's the first thing I would say, is that narrative is really, really important. The second thing I'll mention is that we think about occupational segregation as an issue that goes far beyond just our economy. My colleague, Ann Price, who I think some of you probably know, often talks about occupational segregation as a way that time and joy and legacy are stolen from women and their families. That this is something that really goes beyond the money that women bring into their household, but really transfers from one generation to another, and it really steals, right? Time, love, joy from people's lives. The third thing I want to mention is data. We do a lot of qualitative and quantitative research. And what we always ask is, what's missing from this data? What are the stories that are hidden by these numbers? We finished a big project in New Orleans last year. And as we were doing some of our quantitative data, we originally looked at full-time workers only. And the data we got was really off. We were like, this isn't quite right. And we talked to our stakeholders and partners on the ground. And they said, you should try running the data with part-time workers also. And that really changed the outcome of our data and showing us what sectors were most gender and racially segregated. And that was because so many women were working part-time because of the care responsibilities they had in their community, as our last panel mentioned. But this was just a real flag to us about how it's important to run your data in many different ways and really ask partners who are living and working and in communities on the ground, like, does this look right? How else could we do this so that we're elevating stories that are maybe hidden by this data? And the last thing I'll mention is systems. We really think about occupational segregation as really living within this broader socioeconomic system. And I love the report because I think it really approaches occupational segregation that way also. But I think this is important because when we think about what are the most effective solutions to occupational segregation and the way it impacts women, we also need to think about what else needs to be addressed in the orbit around us so that those solutions can be most effective. So for example, right, we're having this conversation this morning within the context of a really historic rollback in reproductive health and rights. And oftentimes we put that conversation in this silo right over here as if that is not an economic issue, as if women don't experience that as an economic issue. And there is really robust data to show that when women cannot access the reproductive health care they need, when they cannot access an abortion that they want, that they are not able the way they planned, they're not able to participate in the labor market fully, they're not able to have mobility in the labor market, and they're not able to be as economically secure. And our research shows that that translates across many generations, right? So we just need to think about what are these other things that are happening in the world that also impact women's ability to really fully participate in the labor market. And the last thing I just want to mention is that I love that this report really calls on the federal government to legislate for universal public goods. And Emery, I think this really pulls on what you said about human rights. And I think, you know, in the United States, we don't use a human rights framework. And I just think that's such a loss for us. And that makes it so much harder for us to think about public goods, period. And public goods is like a right that we all have. And I think what I talked about at the beginning, right, about these notions of deservedness, that like we all deserve these things. They're not privileges. They're not things that you should have just if you live in the right zip code or have the right job. But that we have a lot of work to do on sort of changing the narratives around what we think of as public goods, how they should be funded, who they should be funded for, right, and who deserves these things. So that's all I have to say, but I'm really happy to be here in conversation with all of you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Let's turn to you, Vonda. As president of the Central Labor Council of Nashville and Tennessee, how can local movements be a part of some of the recommendations highlighted in this report?
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for that question. I really appreciate the work of the Women's Bureau throughout the country, and particularly in the South. Charmaine Davis, who is the Southern Regional Director for the Women's Bureau, has convened spaces where labor councils, so labor councils are really hubs for both their affiliates, our community partners, and now this growing body of work around building relationships with governmental agencies. We had the opportunity in September for the Women's Bureau to convene with the mayor's office a table where women came from different aspects of our economy to talk about their challenges in terms of what they're experiencing. And what we found is that some of the recommendations that were listed in the program were really highlighted in the work that they did. But childcare in particular was one that came up over and over again as a barrier for women. I also had the opportunity as a part of my role in the community to serve on the CARES Act and ARP funds distribution. And that was something, just like some of the cities that were highlighted in the report, that was something that we did in Nashville to ensure equity in what is the central agreements. You know, not often are union folks included, it's seen as key partners in such broad-based alliances. But under the initiatives of reports like this, the Women's Bureau, the union movement is seen as a critical voice in terms of expressing the role of workers. We can expand and deepen the role of unions by fostering equity both within our communities and within our unions. This can happen in several steps that stakeholders can take. More broad-based partnership building. Unions need to be seen as equal partners, developing policies and initiatives that support equity in the workplace. This requires building relationships between unions and employers, government, and other stakeholders that enable an ongoing dialogue and collaboration. And also education and training. You know, having the ability to be in spaces like this, I see as a huge advantage to the work that we do in Middle Tennessee. But it's not a space that's often, many of my colleagues in other states, Brother John can confirm this. You know, we just are not brought to the table in these kind of spaces. And so that is very important that we have ongoing education and training and that it trickles down to the grassroots level, the programs that are available. The data collection that was mentioned and analysis. As organizations on the ground, we can play a key role in data collection and analysis to help to identify how things are working. And advocates. We always serve as advocates at local policy, at the national level, at the international level, that promote equity in the workplace, such as fair pay, equal opportunities, and non-discrimination policies. And there was another piece that we are doing in Nashville. We talked about apprenticeship readiness programs. All over the country, the North American Building Trades has built out a model that's being built out all over the country under the Trades Futures umbrella. Those programs, we have a very robust program in Nashville that it is seeking to go in communities that don't have the social connection to the trades, right? We bring them in for 3 weeks and teach them the skills to help them to be successful in the construction trades. What we've seen in our last 3 classes is an uptick in women. In fact, in our most recent class, we had a mother who had 6 kids who wanted to do better with her kids. Now, childcare becomes an issue in those instances. And so the work and investment that our city has made in increasing childcare is definitely something that helped this sister in this situation and hopefully will change generationally the trajectory of her family. I also wanted to touch on one other thing, and that is the framework post all of the investments that have been made and how we go about supporting them and maximizing the investments of the next 2 years to really have some long-term impact on the infrastructure, both in the childcare networks and in the scaling apprenticeship readiness programs so that we can increase the diversity in our trades. The report offered what I believe is a foundation and framework for work in emerging climate. Tennessee is one of the places where a great deal of electric vehicle investment has been made. And so we are reimagining how our communities operate. And we should be viewing every decision that we make through an equity lens. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to need everybody in this room to continue to watch what happens in Tennessee, because we have to make sure that those investments impact the communities that they were intended to impact. And so I appreciate the work of the folks that put this report together, and it will help to instruct our work going forward.
Thank you, Vanda. Let's stick with labor and jump here to the end to John Murphy. John, prior to your current role as international representative, you were the business manager of Plumbers Local 1 in New York City. Can you share some of your insights and experiences on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the construction industry?
Sure.
Particularly on what Vanda said about some of the barriers for women.
Sure. And thank you for including me in this really important conversation. I'm proud of the strides that the UA has made both locally and nationally, as well as the building trades, but we still have a lot of work to do. But if I could just reflect on one comment, it was brought up about the Women's Convention, not the Women's Convention, I'm sorry, women's right to vote. And it makes me think about the Women's Convention in Seneca Falls in 1848, and between Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Frederick Douglass, and where we are today with our governor, our Senate Majority Leader, our Speaker, our Commissioner of Labor, our Attorney General. We've come a long, long way. It doesn't reflect what we've done yet in the building trades, but I think we'll get there for sure. So any good that we try to bring apart, first of all, in the unionized construction industry, there is no pay disparity, right? As long as you're a journeyman or an apprentice, everybody's paid the same, whether you're black or white, man or woman, you're paid the same. That's a good thing. But any change we want to make doesn't happen unless it comes from the top. The leadership must come from the top. And I'm very fortunate to have a general president, Mark McManus, who believes strongly in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's not only reflected in his administration, but it's also reflected in the comments he makes, and he expects us in leadership positions to make sure we have these conversations, we have these statements, how important it is to be inclusive. Just in January, the UA just began a maternity benefit for members that give birth. They get 6 weeks at $500 a week while they're on maternity. So that's a good start. And again, more to do. Vanda brought up the trades futures, which the New York City building trades, the national building trades, and non-traditional employment for women are on the verge of a pilot program that would give scholarships to women that need childcare assistance. And that's another plus, but it brings it into the focus, into the mainstream to have these discussions and understand. And it's not just the UA that's leading the way. We spoke about Sean McGarvey, the head of the National Building Trades. He practices what he preaches. He believes in apprenticeship readiness programs and a strong advocate for Women Build Nations. That's a conference of women throughout the country, where it wasn't long ago there was probably less than 100. And in 2022, there were more than 1,300 building trades women in attendance, 500 of which were UA members. And that's something we're really proud of. They're great strides that we've made. But if I could, the question you had for me was, maybe I can share some of my experiences. And while we have so many success stories today, we have Janet Powers, a business agent with Local 638, 2 terms, Ashley Cirilli, who's one of our New York State regional organizers. But 3 stories that I've had in my experience at Local 1, and I've had the pleasure to watch the growth in these 3 individuals work their way to leadership positions. So one is Carl Johnson, African-American man from the Bronx that entered the apprenticeship program in the conventional way, and Carl's with us today, in the conventional manner, but soon took advantage of the opportunity that he was given, realized that he needed to be the best that he could be. Carl not only was a great apprentice, became a highly skilled journeyman, but in addition to that, he gave back to his local union. Carl was at every union meeting, still is at every union meeting. Carl volunteered, whether it was picnics, whether it was picket lines, he was always there. And I had the good fortune of asking Carl to come up and join my administration as an organizer. We've had a great relationship, a unique one where Carl did all the work. I got the credit. And it worked out great. And he is a leader in every sense of the word. And I'm so proud to have seen the growth in Carl Johnson. Another success story is Melissa Brotherson. Melissa Brotherson had an opportunity to join the Local 1 apprenticeship program through non-traditional employment for women. Melissa was a single mother from Brooklyn who would get up at 4 o'clock every day, dress her son, drop her son off at her neighbor's, and take a 2.5-hour train ride to the North Bronx to begin her apprenticeship. Eventually, she was transferred to the World Trade Center site, where she learned to become a welder. She went on to become not only one of the top apprentices, but one of the most highly skilled welders that we had in our industry. Melissa Brotherson today is a full-time instructor in one of the best apprenticeship programs that we have in the country, the Local 1 apprenticeship program. When new apprentices come into Local 1, she is the first person that they see, the first person. And finally, some of you may have heard of Judeline Cassidy, an absolute firebrand. Judy Cassidy was raised by her grandmother in Trinidad. And when she took plumbing classes in Trinidad, and when she came to the United States, she couldn't get into the industry. So she worked as a house cleaner, she worked as a nanny, finally was given the chance to get into the apprenticeship program. But what she soon learned, and she shared with me, was that if she was dispatched to a job site, or I'm sorry, when somebody would call to say she's being dispatched, the foreman would typically say, oh, no, don't send a woman to my site. Don't do it. So soon the agents would start to say, we're sending Cassidy to the job site. She'd get on the job site, be able to show her wares, but she'd also be met with the look. And that's something that I haven't experienced. Came on the job, but she proved that she belonged in every sense of the word. Excuse me. So Judy Cassidy, again, asked her to join my administration. When I was the business manager of Local 1, she's on the examining board today. She is a shop steward for the New York City Housing Authority Plumbers. Excuse me. And she is the founder of a great organization called Tools to Tiaras, where she familiarizes young women to get into the trades. So she's been truly inspirational. And what's the common denominator? They all took advantage of the opportunity given to them. They persevered, but they also had mentors along the way that would be able to guide them. That's something that I had inherently as a fourth generation member, whether it's a father, a brother, an uncle, a friend. And usually those that come from direct entry don't have that. So it's critical for us as union leaders to continue that communication, continue that mentoring to follow the path, and that equals success. And I finally say one thing. I brought up the issue of our governor and the leadership, and it reminds me of a phrase that was given to me by a plumber from California. Her name is Laura Ceja. Laura Ceja has risen to become one of my coworkers, UA Special Representative. And what she said, and it still strikes me today, is if you can see it, you can be it. So seeing those examples makes it a real possibility. If you see it, you can be it.
Thank you, John. Maya, to round us out, earlier this year, the Marco Foundation and its partners put forth a framework to clarify how states can be intentional in prioritizing workers and job quality in the implementation of state transportation and clean energy spending. Could you tell us about the framework and what are priority actions that states should take in this critical window of opportunity?
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be with you all today, and congratulations to the ILR School on a fantastic report and event series. I lead workforce policy and research initiatives at the Marco Foundation. And for those that are unfamiliar with Marco, we are an operational foundation focused on expanding access to good quality employment in the U.S. with a focus on adults that do not have bachelor's degrees and economically marginalized populations. As you noted, we released a report earlier this year that presents a 3-part framework of actions that states can take to prioritize workers, economic inclusion, and good quality jobs within the context of transportation and clean energy spending. This report was informed by an initiative that we launched last year in partnership with the Eno Center for Transportation and the National Association of State Energy Officials, also known as NASIO, that engaged agency staff in 6 states. The initiative centered on bringing together representatives from state departments of transportation and their counterparts in workforce agencies in 3 states, and in another 3 states, energy offices with workforce agencies. We we brought these teams together in separate conversations where we discussed ways that the agencies could work together in light of the immense new funding going to states, in particular to DOTs and energy offices, and really to break down silos within those states between those agencies. We wanted to learn, secondly, about what it is like for decision makers in key positions right now to actually move their agencies to set workers and economic inclusion as priorities in infrastructure implementation, because historically they have not been. So why did we focus on transportation, energy, and workforce agencies? So one, transportation and clean energy sectors will represent the vast majority of federal infrastructure funds over the foreseeable future. Within IIJA, $600 billion will be going to transportation. Clean energy is the second largest sector in IIJA. It's also the infrastructure focus of the Inflation Reduction Act. Why did we focus on these state agencies? State DOTs and energy offices are major decision makers over the bulk of federal funds that are going to states. The law did not design it such that the funds are necessarily going to be infused through workforce and education agencies. And states, these agencies are decision makers over not just workforce priorities within competitive grant dollars, but also in formula dollars that are going to states, regardless of whether they apply. At the same time, for these agencies, for these state infrastructure agencies, workforce goals and economic inclusion have not historically been considered primary objectives. They do not necessarily prioritize this as compared to safety and finishing projects on time and things like that. At the same time, there's really pronounced siloing, typically between workforce education and education agencies with their infrastructure counterparts. That's a really strong reality that will hinder the effectiveness of these dollars if these agencies do not work together. I want to also quickly say that we focused on economic inclusion and good quality jobs for a few reasons that I think we should be clear about. One, there will need to be many more workers soon from now to complete these projects. I think that it's well known in infrastructure agencies that there will need to be really robust workforce programs to create the workforces that are needed for projects at this scale. And so in light of that, there's a real openness to be more inclusive in these workforces. I think the report did a phenomenal job of detailing the gender and racial disparities that are really stark in some of these sectors, in particular in clean energy. And those challenges are mirrored across infrastructure sectors. Women across all of infrastructure sectors make up less than 1 in 5 workers. In some of the occupations that are most anticipated to grow, women are 2 to 7% of the workforce. So clearly, most of the status quo across the country with relation to these infrastructure occupations has not been going pretty well. Black and Latino workers across infrastructure are heavily concentrated in lower paying positions. So there is this necessity aspect to build those workforces, but I think there's also a really strong desire from a large segment of the population in the US to have government actually break these systems that reproduce intergenerational denials of economic opportunity. But there are many policy levers that states and other infrastructure project owners have at their disposal that they could use to prioritize inclusive access to good quality jobs through their spending that are not well understood. And so there's a real opportunity to call out how these agencies can focus on economic inclusion and good quality jobs in their spending, and we wanted to clarify that. So in bringing together these tables of key decision makers in a small number of states, as I mentioned, we found that state agencies staff are navigating a tremendous amount right now. There's lots of formula money coming to them. There's competitive grant opportunities going very quickly. A lot of them have different standards around workforce and incentives to navigate. Additionally, in addition to the fact that those agencies don't often work closely together, they often don't have a shared language about workforce programming and policies. Workforce development, I'll just point out, is a very jargon-heavy field, and it's very complicated. And so from those tables, we wanted to put out a simple framework that people could really use to talk about bold actions at their disposal with this funding. So I'll talk a bit about what that framework entails. As I mentioned, there are 3 categories of actions that we believe states can prioritize. So 1, states should focus on identifying ways that they can use existing systems overseen by different agencies in their state to foster inclusive paths to these jobs. And this entails establishing meaningful cross-agency collaboration between infrastructure, workforce, and other state agencies involving private sector stakeholders to lean on mutual capacities that already exist. For example, in every state, there is an opportunity to train many thousands of people that are soon to exit incarceration for infrastructure careers and connect them to jobs and supportive services so that when they do end periods of incarceration, they transition into skilled work that pays a living wage. Doing that involves state workforce and education agencies working in partnership with departments of correction. This doesn't happen at the level that it should. And in addition to that, infrastructure agencies within the state can tap into that partnership to inform the trainings that are being offered, the occupations that people are being prepared for, and even offer offers of employment for people before they leave incarcerations. In addition to that whole partnership contributing to not just training and the job offer, but supportive services for people when they leave incarceration and they are in the work site in a new field to continue in that work. And an example of that model is California's Prison to Employment Initiative, which really exhibits this cross-agency partnership to use existing capacities. Additionally, setting that kind of cross-agency collaboration to make it actually happen, first and foremost, setting workforce as an infrastructure priority will need to happen. And it's most likely going to happen in a meaningful way with governors' leadership and with governors' cabinet members' leadership. I'll just point that out, that it's difficult to shift gears for an agency and make workforce and job quality a priority of spending and of policies without that kind of political will. Secondly, states can use flexible incoming funding to make grants to augment workforce programming. I'll point out that this is where I think the vast majority of people's mind goes when they think about what states can do. They can spend money directly to support training, wraparound services, recruitment. And there's lots of money going to states where that is an option. For example, there is about $50 billion across all states each year over the next 5 years in surface transportation funds that are going to states by way of formula that can be used for meaningful workforce training and services for people in transportation. This funding is very flexible. It hasn't typically, and these flexibilities are new in this infrastructure law. And the third part of this framework is that states can shape their spending to prioritize workforce goals by embedding workforce job quality and critically accountability priorities into their procurement. We wanted to make clear that it's not just about using flexible funding for workforce programming, it's also about creating opportunity for those programming, for those programs through your procurement. It's not often on people's minds that as a spending agency, there is an opportunity to support workforce and opportunity through terms in your procurement. For example, if a state is supporting pre-apprenticeship programs with a focus on preparing underrepresented demographic groups for careers in the skilled trades or in manufacturing related to these sectors, they can also create incentives for employers to hire and retain graduates of those programs through incentives in their procurement. Illinois does this through a bid credit system related to the state's public works investments. I'd also like to point out that we went into this initiative with the hypothesis that silos between infrastructure and workforce agencies misses a huge opportunity to align supply of labor investments like recruitment and training with demand for that labor. That is actually contractors or agencies themselves hiring for particular skills. We really want to get the idea out there that meeting the opportunity at scale and intentionally opening doors for people will require that alignment. And another thing I'll just close with is this is not just an opportunity. Cross-agency collaboration between infrastructure, workforce, and education agencies is not just an opportunity for infrastructure agencies to have the workforce to complete the projects that their investments are geared towards. It's also an opportunity for the public workforce system and education systems to have better outcomes for people that use their services. Right now, far too many people that receive services from the public workforce system shortly thereafter obtain jobs that pay low wages with unclear paths to mobility. There's lots of opportunity in infrastructure sectors to have a long-lasting career, have a career that pays a family-sustaining wage. And to the extent that those occupations can be better prioritized and that people can be connected to them more easily, that's also an opportunity for the workforce system. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. We're coming to the end. So we really only have 5 more minutes, but, and this has been so many rich points, but thankfully we have lunch, so we can continue our discussion afterwards. But I do want to take the last 5 minutes to kind of start with Andrea and move this way. Thinking about the opportunities, but also thinking about the barriers, what is a barrier and how are you hopeful that that barrier can be overcome in terms of addressing, that's a very broad question, but in terms of addressing the challenges from the perspective that you are working?
I love this question about hope. I teach classes and I always try to end on like, where are we finding joy and hope in our work? I think that the attention to childcare is really important and gives me hope. I also am mindful of how historically, when we have tried to pass universal programs, they have not been universally available. So at Maven, we our lens is looking at how will these programs impact Black women. And that's all of our work sort of takes that lens. And so while I'm hopeful that this dialogue is so prevalent in a way that it wasn't for so long, and that women's invisible labor is now visible, I'm also, I'll say I'm hopeful that we can create these programs in a way that is more inclusive and more universal than we have in the past.
So what makes me hopeful is these apprenticeship readiness programs have the ability to transform our apprenticeship programs. And when you talk about the work in California around prison to employment pipeline, I think that labor and these funding streams have a vital role in making sure that we are offering these apprenticeship readiness classes so that transitions can be, and in fact, in Nashville, we have been working with the sheriff's office to try to do exactly what you say. The wraparound service piece means that we have to continue to network to find folks to help to support. We have training programs and workforce programs, but sometimes, particularly when you're returning citizens, there are specific needs that you need, and it requires the collaboration of a broad base of organizations. But it makes me hopeful that we understand that these structures and systems are necessary, and we see great models all over the country. So.
Thank you, Vonda. Maya?
Sure. So I think that there's been great momentum, particularly at the federal level, to prioritize workers and economic opportunity in infrastructure and CHIPS funding. We're seeing that increasingly in funding opportunities from the Biden-Harris administration. I think that as governments at all levels can really figure out the nuts and bolts of how any spending government does can insist on good quality jobs and do everything in its disposal to break patterns of, racial and gender inequality. If we can figure out how to do that, that has implications for trillions of dollars every year and can really move the needle across the whole economy in job quality and inclusive economic opportunity.
Thank you. And John?
I believe the New York City building trades model of direct entry with some of the programs under the leadership of Gary LaBarbera is changing the face of the building trades here in New York. But what's important to be able to support direct entry from non-traditional employment for women, from helmets to hard hats, from construction skills and pathways to apprenticeship, we need a solidified pipeline of work. We're fortunate to have in Mayor Adams, in Governor Hochul, and in President Joe Biden, who never fails to say the word union publicly, which I'm very proud of. With those PLAs in place, it allows us to create that pipeline and help those in the underserved communities and create more diversity, equity, and inclusion in the trades.
Great. So I want to thank the four of you for joining us today and for your thoughtful reflections and comments. And I'll turn it over to Patricia for closing remarks.
You don't have to move right now, but we want to see if there's some questions from the audience. Also, you can divert your questions to Commissioner Reardon and to Gail if you have any questions for them. Also, reminder to people online that you can put your questions on the chat and we'll try to answer them here. So anything that you want to elevate, you want to ask that you think wasn't elevated, any questions? I have a microphone. Well, I do have a question then, just to get the conversation going. The webinar series was for us an opportunity to begin the conversation about how to support innovation on the ground. So how do we continue that conversation? Because this is report created a roadmap, and we hope that you use it. Actually, you can download it from our website. It's not that long, but you can go to our website and download it, and you can read it. But it's a roadmap of how to approach equity. So, but how do we continue this conversation? And maybe, New York State is in a good place, but places like Tennessee are beginning to get there. So how do we continue that conversation?
Well, thank you for the question. So over the last 2 years, I think we have begun a positive conversation and are moving in a positive direction. However, we do have a state leadership that often is not utilizing the resources that are coming to them to help most underrepresented and disadvantaged people in our community. So I think that convening these kinds of spaces with the academic institutions and community partners locally and sharing this framework is a step in the right direction, because the more we can bring these stakeholders together, the more often we can, even when the top does not understand the change, that from the grassroots level, we can move a positive agenda.
Thank you. Any questions from here?
In the back, someone in the back.
Thank you. So let me make sure I can see you. So I am here as a representative of the Mid-Hudson Valley Clean Energy Hub. And so I'm doing workforce development for clean energy workers in rural areas. And I found myself wondering, as we were talking about the predominance, like how many union jobs there are and the high union populations in New York State, I found myself wondering if those are clustered in urban centers, because that's what I'm seeing. And I'm really curious. I'm trying to do this work in some areas that are a lot more rural, and I'm not sure if the resources are getting there. What I'm hearing is they're not. So I'm curious about trying to expand this work so it's not only reaching cities. Any thoughts on that?
Who wants to tackle, Robert?
So that's part of what the Just Energy Transition Office is supposed to be tackling, because this is for New York State, it is a statewide transition to renewable energy. It doesn't just happen in the cities. It happens in cities faster, perhaps because there's more workforce there, but it really has to happen everywhere in the state. So we are charged at the DOL to understand where the work is and how do we help those workers either go into that work or transition their skills from fossil to renewable. And that's going to take a lot of input from people like you. One of the things that I really appreciate about this report and the conversation is it really is striking to me that one of the things that is absolutely essential, I think, to making the clean energy transition happen, to being able to have more diversity and inclusion in our workforce, is we have to come together out of our own pods and reach across tables to people that we may not always talk to, but we all have common interests. And it's really critical at this point. I come from a labor background, and there were times in my labor background that we unfortunately looked at other advocates as adversaries because they weren't coming from our point of view. And we have to change that dynamic, because if we're going to succeed in this kind of future, we're going to have to build networks of understanding. We don't all have to agree, but we have to understand each other so we can get there. So I need your help.
Yeah, Gail, maybe you want to address from the federal perspective, commitment to the rural area.
I will stand up. I think that is such a good question. I'm unfamiliar with exactly what's going on in New York, but as John said, this is an administration that very strongly believes in the importance of a union, and the investments that we have really centered making it easier for workers to understand what their rights are in order to unionize. And it is certainly the goal to look at that in every community across this country.
John?
Yes, that's a great question, by the way. And what we're starting to see, and it was proven out in Zach's report regarding just renewable jobs and solar jobs in particular. What has happened in rural communities, you had power generating facilities. As you shutter those and go towards other forms, we're seeing job loss as well before there's job creation. But the good news is we should build as much renewable as possible, but it's still not going to be enough. And we need to build all available alternative clean sources of energy, which would create more jobs and make sure that the grid remains reliable. Alternative clean sources overall.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions to that, or is there another question from the floor? Okay, yes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for speaking with us. I really enjoyed hearing from all of you. I guess my question is just, I know we talked briefly about the history of labor history in the US, and also just how exclusionary it has been. I guess just hearing these conversations today and talking about how do you bring people who aren't in the room today, bringing these conversations to them. I also find there's a divide between academia and the real world. So it's the conversation just about, I guess, from all of your perspectives, or was willing to answer the question about how do you, I guess, what actions are you seeing to include minorities or marginalized communities within the work, and to kind of, I guess, like get the jargon out the way and help people understand what unionizing looks like in their own areas of work.
So I'll take that. It's interesting. We have partnered with people like the Catholic Labor Network, who recruits in parishes for our apprenticeship readiness program, and the Ministerial Alliance. Really, we should pay them. They are great recruits, and they see in their congregations, what the need is. And so for us, especially in a not being in New York, but being in a pretty low union density state. I think it's 7% in Tennessee. We have to have ongoing conversations in every space that we can get in around what the value of the union is. And so this apprenticeship program has really made a difference in terms of us being able to be more outward rather than just the social networks that normally help folks to get into the trades. You know, now we have opened up that conversation, and we have all of our community partners that work in Black and Brown communities. We have a high immigrant community, but Nashville is one of the most dangerous construction markets in the country. We have more construction deaths than anywhere else in the country. I think Houston is second, Atlanta is third. And so the union difference and the value of apprenticeship programs is a message that we are working with our partners to move throughout our community.
Can I add one thing? I also just want to add, when we at Maven start to think about where we're going to do research, we've done research in a few different cities around the country. We don't do the research unless we have a community partner that we can do that research with. And we're really trying to disrupt old ways of doing research. And looking for new ways to bring community members into how we shape the research question. What is the research protocol going to look like? How is it going to be used? And right, that's really different than how lots of us have been trained to do research. Myself, I am a public health person. It's different than how I was trained to do research also. But I think that also really helps bring folks in at the beginning and help them own the research and feel good about it, and that it reflects the lived experience on the ground, and then is more usable when you have, right, the results of the research. So it's sort of a wonky answer, but I do think it's important.
Risa, you wanted to make
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks. So I certainly second that. You know, the Worker Institute, we're directly in sync with that idea of having the grounded research. But the other thing I wanted to mention is just how powerful alliances can be. And we see this repeated again and again. Vonda, your remarks as well. We saw this last week when we had our Union Days events in Ithaca, and we had a panel on Southern union organizing, that the alliances between the sort of more traditional unions, worker centers, civil rights organizations is so powerful for knowledge, places to go, places to reach out to, the energy that it's brought, the joy, right, that it brings to working together. And I wanted to point out in the report, we really identify and highlight two of these, and there are many of them, but we highlight in Oregon, the Oregon Trades Women's Organization, which is extraordinary in terms of what they do in these alliances. And then also in the Northeast, starting in Massachusetts, but more regional, I mentioned the Policy Group on Trade Women's Issues, the PGTI, which again brings together groups to work together to make these things happen. And there's a real excitement around that, and an infusion of hope that you were talking about in terms of the radical potential of moving forward in this way.
There's one last question on the chat, so I don't want to ignore it. The question is, since the money is coming from the federal government to the states, and the state has the mandates to do equity in the job investments, how can cities work with states or also take advantage of the mandates that are coming up from infrastructure investment? What is the role that cities play to make that happen? For example, New York City or Nashville or any place like that. That's the question.
So it's a little bit like what we do with the federal money. the pot of money comes with some instructions.
Mm.
And they tend to be terrific, but a little general because they're for the entire country. Then the state takes it and adds more instructions for their municipalities. Cities have the obligation to then refine it to what that city needs. What New York City needs will be very different from what Watertown needs because they're entirely different economies. They have different needs, but it's looking at what's the main objective? How is the federal government defined what this money is for? How has the state taken that initiative and further defined it? But it's up to municipalities to look at their economies and their populations and figure out how to put their stamp on it. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes they just take the money and use whatever. The state can't be that granular. And so cities really have a responsibility, citizens have a responsibility in their cities to say to their leadership, we need to make this conform to what our economy and our populations need.
Awesome.
Has
yeah.
something to say?
I would just add on to that. I think that cities have a lot of the same options as states at a high level. They also can, cities also can put, as New York City definitely has, put terms into their spending that really focus on inclusion and job quality. And I'd also add accountability. I think that something that is not, that I don't think we have the strongest evidence on is what models really work to make sure that the terms you put in your spending actually happen, or we find out if they don't happen, or there's corrective action if they don't happen. I think that there are a number of ways we can do that, and I don't know that we know exactly the strongest yet. But in addition to having the option to, use funding that's flowing to the city or that is coming to the city by way of competitive dollars, cities and states can work together to figure out where they can cover gaps in services. So if a city, for instance, if a mayor is really interested in how are they going to use their infrastructure funding to support women to have greater representation in the trades, they are probably interested in to what extent the state is already planning to fund that pre-apprenticeship. And again, there are silos very common between the city and the state as well. So I think some degree of cities expressing their wants from the state about what they need help supporting is important, and then using that as they plan out what gaps they're going to fill. I think having conversations there so there's not duplication or a focus in one in just training, for instance, and not wraparound supports and recruitment is important.
Great. We have lunch for all of you outside, so we can continue this conversation. I think that one of the things that we were trying to elevate through the webinar series and through the one day in-person summit and through this report is that policy alignment and policy only works if you have stakeholders engage in the accountability of making the people in charge of delivering the policy make the structural changes that they need to make the policy shift. So, so this report is a roadmap of where people are working to hold policymakers and make the policy work and hold accountability on the ground to make it happen. And for us at the Worker Institute, we believe that our role is part of being part of those stakeholders. We are academics, we're researchers. We help understand what's happening so that you can continue to do the work that needs to happen to make sure that jobs are created that are disrupting the paradigm of our economy, of leaving women in segregated job positions with no opportunity. So this work of convening stakeholders, labor, unions, leaders, academics, practitioners, organizers, community leaders, that work has been supported through the Lois Gray Innovation Initiative. Lois Gray was a pioneer labor leader in New York State at a time that not many women were leading the labor movement in the country. She was at the forefront, and she was a leader here at the extension programs at the ILR school since the founding of the ILR school. So Lois Gray Innovation Fund exists through a donation that she made to advance the work of innovation in the workplace. It supports innovation, strategies, and practices, and the leaders that are leading that innovation on the ground. And the students, like our 4 students here who help us do this research, Dela, Samantha, Anastasia, and Sarah, because they are the leaders of the labor movement of our research in the future. So we are proud to support them as they engage in this work. So thank you to the Lois Gray Innovation Initiative, and another Paul Clark from our board of the Innovation Initiative is here. So thank you for the support and for staying connected to the ILR school. And I know, Roberta, you're also a member of the Lois Gray Innovation Initiative. So thank you for doing that in addition to all that you do for workers in New York State. So with that, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank my team at the Worker Institute. You can raise your hand so that you can get recognized. Dean Abgar for the support, and Dean Alex Sullivan for the support of this series from the beginning. Like I said, this is the beginning of the conversation. Please download the report. If at any point you're having a gathering, you're having a policy forum, or you're having a meeting and you want us to come and present the findings and discuss them, please let us know, because I think that this is a tool for a conversation. And it's a roadmap to hold the policymakers accountable for changing the paradigm of job creation. Like I said at the beginning, this is a historic moment to value women's work. And the way we value women's work is that we invest in good jobs with a union and with dignity on the workplace. That means free of sexual harassment and gender violence prevention. So thank you so much. We are your partners in this work. Thank you to all the people who gave us feedback. And thank you for all the engagement that we had with us for the last 18 months. To Gail Golden, thank you for the support that you provided and the guidance, and Wendy Chen-Hun, who's not here, and Elise, and all of you. This work is just the beginning, and this is the time that we together are going to change the definition of a good job for the 21st century. Thank you so much. We have lunch and stay, and please let's continue the conversation. Thank you so much.